Facebook has taken critical steps to prepare for the U.S. elections. They've more than tripled their safety and security teams, implemented 5-step ad verification, and launched a new voting information center. Learn more at fb.com/about/elections.
This is CNN Breaking News.
And welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We begin with some breaking news on the U.S. Supreme Court. President Donald Trump intends to choose Amy Coney Barrett to be the new Supreme Court justice, according to multiple senior Republican sources with knowledge of the process. Judge Barrett is a federal judge and Notre Dame law professor with a conservative record. She's also a former law clerk to the late Justice Antonin Scalia. CNN's Pamela Brown and Ariane DeVogue are breaking this story for us right now. Pamela, what are you learning?
Well, Jake, my colleague Jamie Gengel and I have learned that President Trump intends to choose Amy Coney Barrett to be the new Supreme Court justice. This is according to multiple senior Republican sources with knowledge of the process. Now, in conversations with some senior Republican allies on the Hill, the White House has suggested that Barrett is the intended nominee, these sources said. But we should note, all sources have cautioned, Jake, that until it is announced by the president, there is always that possibility that he could make a last-minute change. But the expectation, as of now, nearly 24 hours away from that announcement, is that Judge Barrett is the choice. And he's scheduled to make that announcement tomorrow afternoon. She's been the leading choice throughout this week since Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. She is the only potential nominee known to have met with the president in the White House in person this week, according to two of the sources. And one source said that Trump was familiar with Barrett already. As we know, he had met with her previously. He had met with her twice. This time around, this week, she had been the top contender. Last time there was a vacancy. She was seen at her South Bend, Indiana home on Friday. We should note it's not clear if she had been told that she is the choice, the intended nominee. Often that is done as late as possible to maintain secrecy around the announcement. But as one source told me, Jake, the machinery is in motion. In previous nomination announcements, the White House had multiple rollouts planned just in case the president made a last-minute decision to switch to another candidate. But one source said it would be surprising if there were a change since allies are already being told. But again, anything could happen between now and the announcement, given the unpredictable nature of this president, Jake.
Indeed. Nothing's official until it's official. This is what sources expect that he will do, but President Trump could change his mind. Ariane, what would this mean for the Supreme Court, presuming that Amy Coney Barrett were confirmed? What would this mean for the makeup of the court? What would it mean for Roe v. Wade? What would it mean for Obamacare? What would it mean for all sorts of issues?
Right, Jake. This would be a dream pick for the religious right. She's young. She's 48 years old. She would be the youngest member on this court. Of course, it's a life-tenured position. She is in the mold of Justice Scalia, and we know how important that is to President Trump. In fact, she's a former clerk of Scalia, and she was one of his favorites. She sat and sits on appeals court based out of Chicago. Before that, she taught at Notre Dame. And keep in mind, she has met with Trump. And she has been fully vetted. There were some people who wanted Barrett to take the seat that eventually went to Kavanaugh. They really wanted her for that seat. At the time, people thought, well, then she would probably be a good replacement for Ginsburg if that seat ever opened up. Another thing to keep in mind is during her confirmation hearing for the lower court, the Democrats, particularly Dianne Feinstein, really went after her Catholic faith and asked some pointed questions. After that, Jake, it was conservatives. It really galvanized them. And they were furious, saying that was the Democrats showing anti-Catholic bias. Keep in mind, Jake, the term is supposed to begin the first Monday in October. A week after the election, the court is going to hear Obamacare. And when in 2017, she wrote a law review article, and she was very skeptical of Chief Justice John Roberts' reasoning back in the days when he saved Obamacare. So that's going to worry them, the Democrats.
All right, Pamela, Ariane, thank you so much for that breaking news. President Trump has made clear he wants to fill this seat quickly since he sees the court as potentially having a role in determining the winner of the presidential election. President Trump and his allies have been stoking fear and seeking to undermine public confidence in the election, concerning even Trump allies in Congress and elsewhere that the president is setting the stage to reject a potential election loss. The president's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, today claiming, quote, "I think he commits to a peaceful transfer as long as it's a fair election," unquote. But what the president considers fair remains vague. And in fact, the president's repeated attacks on states' legal vote-by-mail laws, both rhetorically and in state courts, suggest that the ultimate factor for President Trump as to whether or not an election is fair is whether or not he wins. The president has said directly, any election he does not win is rigged.
The only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that.
Keep in mind the president is lagging behind in several polls, both in battleground states and nationally. Now, the FBI director, Christopher Wray, has said that he has seen no evidence of widespread voter fraud. That prompted White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows to attack Wray on TV this morning. What we're witnessing is playing out in front of all of our eyes. The president is setting the stage to argue that if he loses, it's because of fraud. That if experts say there's no evidence of widespread fraud, that they're lying. As his campaign is simultaneously sharing misleading and downright false edited videos of Joe Biden, spreading the harshest of false smears about Biden, and as the president rejects the findings of intelligence agencies that Russia is once again interfering in this election to help him. It seems obvious that the president has doubts that he can win this election fair and square, running a clean campaign based upon his record, so he is instead pursuing an alternate strategy, even as he engages in more traditional campaign activities as he's doing today, as CNN's Caitlin Collins reports.
With 39 days until the election, President Trump is on his second of 3 campaign stops today in 3 different states. As Trump courts key voters, his chief of staff is directly contradicting the FBI director after he testified that there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud in the United States.
With all due respect to Director Wray, he has a hard time finding emails in his own FBI, let alone figuring out whether there's any kind of voter fraud. Perhaps he needs to get involved on the ground, and then he would change his testimony on Capitol Hill.
Chief of Staff Mark Meadows undermining the testimony of Chris Wray, who appeared to choose his words carefully when asked if voting by mail is secure.
Now, we have not seen historically any kind of coordinated national voter fraud effort in a major election, whether it's by mail or otherwise.
Today, Meadows also directly tied Trump's refusal to commit to a peaceful transfer of power should he lose in November to an unusual announcement from the Justice Department.
I think he commits to a peaceful transfer as long as it's a fair election. We now know that we have a Department of Justice investigation into ballots that were discarded from veterans.
The Justice Department announced Thursday it was investigating 9 discarded ballots in Pennsylvania, a state where 6 million people voted in 2016. The DOJ was later forced to clarify it was 7 ballots for Trump, not 9 as they initially claimed. President Trump beginning his day in Florida, where he's courting Hispanic voters, while polls show his support with the group is much stronger than it was 4 years ago.
But I'm thrilled to be back at Doral with so many patriotic Americans who are part of our extraordinary national movement, and that's Latinos for Trump.
Trump's standing with black voters is nowhere near as strong.
Donald J. Trump.
In Atlanta this afternoon, he sought to change that as polls show a close race in the state.
For decades, Democrat politicians like Joe Biden have taken black voters for granted.
Now, Jake, we are told that the Attorney General Bill Barr did brief President Trump on those 9 discarded ballots in Pennsylvania. We're told that was because it had been circulating, and so before it was officially announced, Barr did tell the president about it. That's why you saw the president talking about it before you saw that official release from their office about it. But what we are told by Justice Department officials is they do not think this is any intentional purpose of voter fraud. They actually just think it was improperly trained staff and a poorly designed process that led to this.
Improperly trained staff. The Trump campaign yesterday said the Democrats are trying to steal the election. So that was just completely not true?
Well, that obviously fits the Trump campaign's narrative that there is widespread voter fraud. Instead of pointing to the fact that it was only these 9 ballots, they're military ballots, so they're obviously handled in a different way. And so that is what, so far, the Justice Department has learned. They're still investigating it, of course. And that's why it was so unusual, Jake, that they released that statement yesterday. Is because typically they don't put something like that out while they're still conducting an investigation. But, of course, the White House is using it to imply that there will be more to come, though there's no indication of that yet, Jake.
Right, exactly. The Trump campaign is lying to put not to put too fine a point on it. Caitlin Collins, thank you so much. Interest in voting before Election Day is skyrocketing, according to a new CNN survey. More than 500,000 ballots have already been cast 39 days out from Election Day. Let's bring in CNN's Kristen Holmes. Kristen, break down these numbers for us.
Yeah, Jake. This is a clear sign of what's going to be a record-shattering turnout in this election. And let's get right to those numbers. So far, to date, 28 million pre-election ballots have been requested. That is on top of another 43 million that will automatically be mailed out. And just for some context here, this amount already exceeds the total amount of ballots cast in 2016 before that election. Now, of course, the big question is, who exactly is voting? So let's pull up our party breakdown here. And this is in these key battleground states. And you can see that Democrats are outpacing Republicans by 1.3 million more ballots requested. But there is a huge caveat here, Jake, and that is that this is not a surprise. All of the research, all of the data, the information that we have is that Republicans, and particularly Trump supporters, they prefer to vote in person on Election Day. So they could easily make this number back up. Now, just to give a little bit of visual context here as to just how extraordinary these numbers are, I'm going to pull up the state of North Carolina. And here you can see a side-by-side between 2016 this time and now. The state just surpassed 1 million absentee ballot requests. At this point in 2016, they were at 85,000. I mean, this is a stark difference here. And just for you, I will give you a little bit of data from your home Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The pre-election ballots that have been requested 8 times more than the number of pre-election votes cast in 2016, Jake.
Interesting. All right, Kristen Holmes, thank you so much for that. Let's focus a little bit on North Carolina. It's a key battleground state, very competitive there. I want to bring in the state's Board of Elections Executive Director, Karen Brinson-Bell. Ms. Bell, thank you so much for joining us. So President Trump is calling mail-in ballots a disaster. He's questioning whether or not this election can be honest. A lot is riding on North Carolina, which Obama won in 2008, but has gone Republican in 2012, 2016. What are you seeing in your state when it comes to vote by mail?
We're seeing a tremendous interest. I think the data that was just put up on the screen helps to illustrate that. We've actually had more ballots returned from those million-plus requests that we even had cast in 2016. We think that traditionally we would have had a 4 to 5% participation in vote by mail, but this year we're expecting 30 to 40% of our ballots to be cast absentee by mail in North Carolina.
So you're seeing this huge surge in the number of absentee ballots requested. In your state, as in most states, there is a vote by mail. You don't need to have an excuse, but you do need to request it. How are you planning to handle this huge influx and the possibility that maybe you will not know who won on election night, North Carolina?
Our County Board of Elections have been working tirelessly to be prepared for this. North Carolina was the first in the nation to send out absentee by mail ballots. We do that 60 days in advance, where most states do 45 days in advance of the election. So that's why we're in some ways ahead of the game and are seeing so many requests already, but also so many returned ballots. We're also uniquely positioned. We've had provisions in our law for some time now that allows us to process absentee ballots at dedicated board meetings where our bipartisan board members review and approve the returned ballots, their envelopes, to make sure that they are complete. And then we can actually process those ballots in advance of Election Day.
So there is some controversy.
And then tabulate on election. We tabulate on Election Day.
Got it. So there is some controversy in your state. The 2 Republicans on your state board of elections suddenly resigned. They say in protest. This is after the board pushed a settlement that would allow voters to fix rejected ballots and extend the date to accept ballots. The North Carolina Senate Majority Leader, Phil Berger, is accusing your board of making fraud easier. What's your response?
We put out a statement. The board members are briefed before every board meeting by our agency counsel, who are